Okay, great. So I'm going to begin. Thank you all for joining me on this Thursday evening. Today we're going to be talking about Oxford and Cambridge. I want to give you an orientation on what the process of applying is like, what the universities themselves are like, and give you some of our tips for each of the steps of the application to make sure that you've got a bit more confidence and oversight over what to expect. Just to introduce who I am. So I'm representing Oxbridge Applications. We are a leader in higher education advising. We've been around for quite a long time, since 1999. We provide support for, of course, Oxford and Cambridge universities, but other competitive UK universities too. We have tutors in all academic fields, so regardless of what you are interested in studying, we have a lot of expert tutors that can work with you. And we do a lot of research into the process as well. So we've all been through it ourselves, but we spend most of the time throughout the year gathering data, looking at our own applicants and seeing trends and interpreting statistics, and also speaking to former admissions tutors who work alongside of us. So my name is Theo. I have degrees in the social sciences from Cambridge, the arts from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and the sciences from Birkbeck, where I studied psychology and neuroscience. My background is in higher education research and teaching. I've taught at Birkbeck and a couple of other universities. And most relevantly here, I've advised a lot of university applicants over the past 10 years or so. I also regularly visit schools to speak about university applications and how students can go beyond their school syllabus and start to think more as an undergraduate student. In the next 45 minutes or so, I want to talk a little bit about why you might want to apply to either of these universities, what exactly they're looking for, and how do you stand out? So how do you actually go through the application process and make sure you're putting your best foot forward? Very briefly, a quick orientation. For those who didn't know, you can only apply to either Oxford or Cambridge for one course, of which there are 30 at Cambridge and 52 at Oxford. There's an earlier deadline for Oxbridge, also for clinical courses like medicine and dentistry, and a couple of others. Some people don't realize that it's possible to put down your other UCAS choices later on if you really want to, but most people put all five of their choices down if they're looking to apply for Oxbridge by the Oxbridge deadline. And it's very competitive. How competitive exactly? Well, it's about 15 to 18%, depending on the year, of applicants who apply to Oxford and Cambridge who are accepted onto their chosen course at either university. This, of course, varies by the subject that you apply for, but overall, Oxford and Cambridge have probably the most competitive average offer rates out of all mainstream UK universities. So, why might you want to apply? The first thing to say is that the academic opportunities are probably the most important reason and defining feature of studying at Oxford and Cambridge. Yes, you have world-class resources, you have amazing labs, you have amazing professors, the research facilities are amazing. There's libraries everywhere if that sort of thing excites you. But the central thing that I'd like to talk about is the small group teaching system, which you probably have heard of, which is called tutorials at Oxford or supervisions at Cambridge. They're essentially the same thing. It's a unique system, and to my knowledge, doesn't happen in the same way anywhere else. In a single term at Oxford or Cambridge, you are likely to be asked to do between 10 to 14 pieces of work. Might be essays, in my case it was essays, could be problem sheets if you're applying for say, mathematics or something like physics, or lab reports. So pieces of work. And each of these will be accompanied by an hour usually about an hour, spent with an expert in the subject. They could have been studying the subject for 30 or 40 years. They may have, a Nobel Prize in their subject, or they might have been, finishing their PhD 1 or 2 years ago. Um, and you'd also be accompanied usually by one or two other students. Then the format of that hour is not a passive one where it's like a lecture, but just much smaller. You don't get to sit back and just listen and be lectured by the expert, but it's much more of a two-way process. It's a conversation where you discuss how you found the work, any issues you came into, anything you don't understand potentially, but then explore offshoots and expand your comprehension of the area. And usually it ends up in a kind of debate with other students. So you get a lot from this process of teaching. If that excites you, there is no other university I can name that offers the same kind of contact time or individual attention. And that, by the way, makes it very good value for money as a university. You'll effectively pay exactly the same tuition fees as you would at any other university, but you'd have a lot more contact time. Non-academic opportunities, people often think about Oxford and Cambridge as being only about staying in the library, writing essays, and work, work, work. Really, I would think about it as work hard, play hard. Because if you want to do lots of extracurriculars, then you absolutely can do as long as you're keeping up with your academic work. When I was at Cambridge, I did a lot of sport and a lot of drama. I did maybe 2 or 3 plays every single term. And there's a rule by which you can do well academically and do one, maybe just about two things outside to a decent level. If you're good at balancing your time, absolutely you're able to engage in lots of extracurriculars if you want and have a pretty normal university kind of social life. Yes, the workload is quite high because the terms are quite short, so you have an 8-week term, but the opportunities for non-academic extracurriculars are really great. And also, the surroundings and the history of the places. These are 800 plus year old universities, and you get to sometimes live in spaces and take ownership over a dorm room, which might be hundreds and hundreds of years old. That's quite exciting if you're into history, if you're into tradition, and the good thing is that with some colleges, you're able to go deep into those traditions, and there's some quite quirky things you end up doing as part of your 3 years. And then at other colleges, maybe that are a bit newer, you don't have the same kind of um, history of tradition. So the tradition and the quirky kind of rituals are there, and you can take part in them to a lesser or more greater extent, depending on your interests. But the college system is really great. And I'll go on to talk about that in a bit more detail. I thought it was worth also touching on some worries that people have when they think about applying to Oxbridge. The term Oxford or Cambridge or Oxbridge can have a lot of weight behind it. Um, when I was at school thinking of applying, there was a special Oxbridge group selected who seemed to meet in secrecy, and I wasn't chosen to be part of the group. And in fact, my one of my teachers said you should not apply. I was quite stubborn, so I went for it anyway and ended up getting in. Um, but there can be a little bit of mystery around it, and they sometimes get talked about as being completely separate and different from other universities. Really, the reason why they're talked about in that way um, is because there's more steps involved in the application and because it's an earlier application. There are plenty of amazing universities that you could end up at. And to be honest, all universities have great things about them and less great things about them. There are pros and cons to everywhere. There are things that you'd experience at a different university that you wouldn't have access to at Oxford or Cambridge. So the first thing I'd say is to try not to treat these universities as completely separate or different or special compared with lots of other universities. You're listening to this, and so you're probably academically quite successful. You might have gotten A's, your eights and nines in your GCSEs, and you're used to being an academic high flyer. And so applications to universities can be daunting because you're competing with lots of other similarly academic students who are also high flyers. But like I mentioned, if Oxbridge doesn't work out for you, you're likely to end up at a fantastic university nonetheless. Um, so these are some common fears: fear of rejection, what if I don't get in? Fear of comparison, what if I don't get in, but another person in my year group does? A fear of inadequacy, I'm not good enough to apply. Well, if you have the right grades and the right subjects to apply for the course you want to go for, and you like the look of being a student at Oxford and Cambridge and the way that they teach, then you are good enough to apply. Um, the universities are full of very normal people, albeit with very good grades and who are very interested in their subject. But really, that's all that binds them together. There's a huge diversity and range of different personality types, and a lot of people who ended up at Oxford and Cambridge had exactly the same kinds of fears. So you're not alone. Misconceptions about the workload and lifestyle. The workload is much more manageable than people anticipate. Yes, it's intense. It can be really intense. Um, but no more really than the hours you might already be spending at school. I would compare the necessary workload of being a student at Oxbridge to a regular 9 to 5 job on average, with the occasional additional hours needed when you get closer to deadlines. So this gives you plenty of time to get involved in other things. And also remember that the terms are shorter than most other universities. So they are typically 8 weeks long, versus other universities, which can be 10 to 12 weeks. And then the application process. So this can feel a little bit daunting. Hopefully, I'll be able to walk you through some of this today. And it's true that it takes a few more steps than on other universities, and it's a little bit earlier. But there are also some hidden benefits to doing this. Firstly, you'll improve your other university applications by proxy. Your personal statement needs to be full of supercurricular engagement if you're going to be applying for Oxbridge, and that's going to be effective and hold weight for all the other selective academic institutions you're applying to. Secondly, if you need to prepare for an admissions test or an interview, this will help you to develop skills which will benefit your sixth form studies and also prepare you for university study. In the case of scientific subjects, they will really help you to revise and embed your A-level material. And thirdly, the application process doesn't need to be stressful. As long as you're efficient with your time and you keep it enjoyable for yourself. If you're applying for a subject which you like genuinely, um, and you're honest with yourself about what materials you're enjoying reading and engaging with, then the process doesn't need to be stressful or heavy or tough or boring. It could actually be one of the most interesting and exciting academic experiences you've had so far. And keep this in perspective. Oxford and Cambridge are exceptional universities, of course. They frequently top the world rankings, but they're not the only exceptional ones, and they might not be the best fit for you. There are many places where curious, driven, ambitious students will do really well, and Oxford and Cambridge are just two of them. So, what are they looking for? Grades are a given, I've written here, because the majority of people that apply to Oxford and Cambridge are already, to some extent, self-selected. So their schools have maybe encouraged them to apply. They've looked at the grade boundaries. People realize that it's an academically competitive application to make. And so the majority of applicants have a majority of eights and nines at their GCSEs. Really important to say that your grades are taken in the context in which you've achieved them. So if you have been to a school where it's not the norm to achieve eights and nines for GCSEs, and actually you did really well compared to your school cohort, then that will be taken into account absolutely. And the same goes for A levels and your A level predictions. But really, this is to demonstrate that you need to have ideally strong grades, unless context is to be taken into account. and unless you have strong individual mitigating circumstances, which can also be taken into account. But there isn't a huge difference between the average applicant and the average offer holders because applicants, on average, already hold excellent grades. There isn't much more you can do to improve on them. So are grades an important factor of the application process? To some extent, they can be used as a factor in determining whether people get through to the interview. But actually, the difference between someone who gets through to interview and gets offered a place and the average applicant is just a matter of 1.8 or 1.9 on average. And this is just one part of the puzzle. So there are plenty other things, of other things that the universities are looking at. I'm asked sometimes how many A levels should I be studying or how many A levels should I plan to study? As a general rule of thumb, three is absolutely enough. However, if you're looking to apply for a STEM subject, particularly if it's aligned with mathematics or physics, so physical natural sciences, mathematics, maybe computer science, those kinds of subjects with a strong physical natural science element to it, then there is a strong correlation and a significantly increased offer rate for those holding four A levels versus those holding three A levels. For arts, humanities, social science subjects, three is perfectly fine. The one exception to this I could point to might be any subjects within that middle boundary, so the social sciences, which really need you to have a high level of maths. And often it's taking further maths as a fourth A level. So for economics at Cambridge, that's a pretty typical profile. Four A levels with a fourth in further maths, for example. If your school does not offer further maths, do not panic, because the universities realise this and they offer advice on both of the university websites for how you can perhaps self-study some elements of that further maths A level. And the main reason it's important and useful is because it can help you with the admissions tests and it can help you to prepare for starting the degree in the best possible way. What doesn't matter very much that some people think matters? So the first thing is extracurricular achievements. People sometimes ask me whether their Duke of Edinburgh award is going to hold much weight, or whether the fact they're head boy or head girl, or their first violin in their orchestra, that's going to tip the balance between them getting an offer versus not. Actually, extracurricular achievements hold very little weight in the application process for Oxford and Cambridge. One potential scenario in which they might be looked at is if you're on a very even keel with another applicant, academically speaking, and then they can have a look at what else you've been doing on top of all of your academic achievements, and take that as an indication of your capacity to keep up a strong workload and high results while doing these other things. But unless they're directly related to the course you're applying for, and by directly related, I mean directly related to what you'll be doing on the course, then they are not likely to matter in your application. Work experience sometimes surprises people. So if you're applying for a medical degree, work experience is really important. A couple of other degrees, such as veterinary medicine, potentially architecture, and very softly engineering, where doing a little bit of work experience or having an idea about how those things are applied can be useful. For medicine, it's vital, but for other things, not so much. And this even goes for something like law, because sometimes I read personal statements for, let's take law. You're applying to read law as an academic subject. You'll be writing essays about the law, and you'll be learning the law as well. What you'll not be doing is having client consultations or preparing research documents for clients or having any of that kind of commercial aspect that you then go on to do after your law degree if you want to become a lawyer. So those kinds of skills, having done, I don't know, an internship with Slaughter and May, you might be able to reflect on them in your application in an academic way, but the practical aspect of that, whether you'll make a good lawyer in the future, doesn't matter very much to an academic who might have been studying ancient German law for the past 30 years. Family or school connections. Some people worry that I don't know anyone who's been to Oxbridge, and I worry that maybe other people are getting a foot in the door because their dad or their uncle teaches at Cambridge, or they went there themselves. This really doesn't bear any weight in the application process. For American universities, there is a reality that legacy um, places. So if you have a family history of going to X university, that can be taken into account for US universities. And quite a long time ago, it was also the case at Oxford and Cambridge, but not for a long time. And I've seen very, very well connected um, applicants who are not successful very frequently. So don't worry if you don't have any connections. What does matter a lot? First and foremost is your academic potential to succeed on the course that you've applied for. So they're thinking about you as a potential undergraduate student, and they want to picture what you might do as an undergraduate and what kind of work you might output. So directors of studies who may interview you at the different colleges are looking to recruit students who they think will be able to get a strong degree, a 2-1 degree, or even a first degree in their subject. That really is at the forefront of their mind when they're looking to take students on. Potential does not mean knowledge, because knowledge can be important if you're applying, especially for a STEM subject, but they'll assume a lot of that. They know that you're good A-level students. What really matters then is your thinking skills and what you can do with that knowledge. Because once you start that degree, you'll be covering so much new material that someone with stronger thinking skills and stronger potential will overtake someone else who has stronger knowledge but weaker thinking skills and weaker academic potential. Supercurriculars and enthusiasm. So your interest and curiosity about the subject matter you're applying for is really important, and it's something that they look at in your personal statement, something that might be discussed at the point of interview. And it's really one of the only pieces of evidence they can take to indicate how passionate are you about this subject. Are you going to take an essay title and be fascinated by it and go the extra mile to find that rare resource in a library across town and really think deeply about the content that you've been given? So your enthusiasm is really important, aside from your academic potential, because even if you're incredibly smart and you've got huge potential, academically speaking, if you're not that interested in the subject you're applying for, you're still likely to be overtaken by someone else who has more interest and equal potential. And thirdly, suitability. So suitability for the course, which is implied by your supercurriculars, your enthusiasm, but also suitability for small group learning. And that means, what are you going to be like in a supervision or a tutorial when you start as a student at one of these universities? They see that clearly when you go for the interview, and really that's the key reason that they interview. They do so much small group teaching that it's such a big investment of their time over 3, 4, 6 years in the case of medicine, hundreds of hours spent by an eminent academic with individual students, that the interview process is a necessity to make sure that that's mutually compatible, that it's right for you and it's right for them. So how do they see these things? Your UCAS form, which is how you apply to all universities in the UK, you have 5 choices to make on your UCAS form, um, must be sent by mid-October. You may have additional forms to fill out in the case of Cambridge. So they ask you to fill out what's called a My Cambridge application form, which is due a week after that, which asks for a little bit more information and gives you the chance to write a shorter personal statement. Within your UCAS form, they see all the grades you've achieved and your predicted grades, which are usually based on end of term, end of year assessments even. And so if you have those coming up, which you're likely to if you're in year 12, then make sure you structure your revision properly and you work hard for them, because your predicted grades matter a lot. Personal statements, so your personal statement, which is in 3 chunks, will be in your UCAS form. And that will be right beside your school reference. So your school will have as much space to talk about you as you have to talk about yourself in your personal statement. So they'll be taking both of those things seriously, as will all other universities when they see these things. They'll also see information about your school, so things like average attainment for GCSEs, average attainment for A levels, or what qualifications your school does teach, how many students are at the school, what sort of destinations they end up at, and so on and so forth. Any extenuating circumstances you have will also be in that form. So if you had to miss school for a period for any reason, or if there was anything that affected your performance, academically speaking, that will go into your UCAS. Then you're likely to need to sit an admissions test. Not everyone does, but the majority of courses at Oxford and Cambridge ask you to take some kind of admissions test. If you're a medicine applicant, then the UCAT is what you'll be taking, and the window for that is slightly earlier. So you can start taking that, I believe it's from July. I'm not sure if it's been announced yet this year. If you're a law applicant, you'll need to take the LNAT. And similarly, that's a window, and it's slightly earlier that you can start taking that from. Otherwise, you're likely to either take what's called the TARA for either Oxford or Cambridge. It's now replacing the TSA for Oxford, the TMUA, which is a maths test, or the ESAT, which is an engineering and science aptitude test. So there's been some changes to admissions tests. I can talk a bit more about those a little bit later on, but you're likely to need to take those then, and your scores will be sent to the universities that want to see them. It's not only Oxford and Cambridge that look at admissions tests. Other universities are beginning to use them. Imperial, notably, UCL in the case of the Tara, and probably a few others yet to announce. Written work. So if you're applying for a course which is very essay based, you might not have an admissions test to do, but you might instead have to submit a couple of examples of your work from school. And that goes in early November. And then interviews. Everyone who gets a place at Oxford or Cambridge must first go through an interview or two or more. These happen in December. So all of these pieces of information are looked at by both Oxford and Cambridge. There is a little bit of variation in the weighting of this information depending on the course. But overall, a rule of thumb is that each of these pieces of information are important because they make holistic decisions about applicants. So how do you stand out? I'm going to take a little bit more time going through this. Curriculum planning. So I'm assuming most of you are in year 12, so you're already midway through your first year of A levels or IB or equivalent. There's not much you can do to change your choices of subject at the moment. There may be some wiggle room in maybe the EPQ you choose to take or extended essay, or maybe you're doing 4 A levels, you don't need to, you can drop one of them where this will be relevant for you. But it's also important to make sure that you are carefully checking any required or useful subjects for the courses you're considering. If you don't have a useful or recommended subject, many people applying will do, and there's a reason why they say that it's useful. So if you don't have that subject that's recommended or useful, doesn't mean you're not eligible or you couldn't get a place, but you need to think about how you're showing those skills or that awareness of that knowledge in other ways. With your curriculum, lots of admissions tests are not based in particular syllabus. So the TARA, for example, is accessible regardless of what A levels you're taking. Yes, there are some quantitative questions in the TARA, but they're accessible as long as you've done maths GCSE. With the TMUA or the ESAT, it's a different story. So with the ESAT, for example, you need to do mathematics, and then you need to do 2 further sections out of physics, biology, chemistry, and further mathematics, or mathematics 2, which is slightly more advanced questions. The choice of course you make will dictate which modules you need to take usually, but think, particularly if you're not doing A levels, about how best to prepare yourself to take those exams in October, because the syllabus is usually based on the corresponding first year A levels and some of the higher level GCSEs. If you're not sure and you're thinking about what to take and you're in year 11 or even year 10, then speak to us. We're very happy to give some advice on this and help give some guidance. But try to keep your options as open as possible by taking what used to be called facilitating subjects or traditional subjects, which are deemed to prepare students well for university study. So those tend to be subjects like English literature, history, languages for humanities and arts, mathematics, the three sciences, further mathematics for the sciences, and a few accompanying subjects as well. A really good resource for this comes from Cambridge. It's called The Subject Matters. So if you're planning your subjects ahead, make sure to look at the course pages you're considering and check out Cambridge's page, The Subject Matters. Course choice. This is another big strategic decision which is really impactful because courses differ massively in their admissions chances. This changes slightly each year, but it's true to say there's a range from 4% offer rate up to above 50% offer rate. People have a lot of preconceptions about what they can do after X degree or Y degree. However, the majority of courses open the same kinds of doors in terms of careers. They don't differ massively within certain windows in career prospects. At least they don't differ as much as people think. So my advice is usually to be open-minded, especially at this stage, and just explore similar kinds of options. Here's a quote from Cambridge. A common misconception is that you have to go into a job directly related to the degree subject you studied. In fact, for the majority of vacancies we advertise each year, the employers would welcome applications from any discipline. And that's really true. So keep love of the subject at the forefront of your mind and be open-minded about the course you apply for. Just to demonstrate the differing rates of offer rate here, just six random samples. So you can see languages at Cambridge, this was an offer rate from last year, have around a 50% offer rate, which seems pretty good for Oxford and Cambridge. And then the other side of the spectrum, you have a course called Economics and Management, which has just a 5%, it hovers around 5% each year. Does that mean if you're interested in economics, you should just apply for languages because of the offer rates? No, absolutely not. You must be comfortable with the idea of studying this subject at other universities. You must also have a passion and a talent for the subject area because you'll be doing it intensively for 3, 4, or more years. However, the next steps after university may not be as dictated by your course choice as you think they are. So at this stage, I would say try and think beyond the obvious. You may already be pretty sure about what you want to do, but let's say you're interested in biology, broadly speaking, you've got biology A level, you think you want to do something based around biology. So there's the option of natural sciences, which is a combined science course at Cambridge, where you get to study a few different sciences. There's biomedical sciences. We focus on, biomedical sciences, so things like genetics, neuroscience. There's biochemistry, which crosses over much more into chemistry. Psychology, if you like a bit of social science and you want to focus on human behavior. There's human sciences, which is a real mix of different subjects you can study at Oxford. There's even biological anthropology, which you can access either through Arc and Anth at Oxford or through the archaeology course at Cambridge. And people don't know much about this subject, but it's really how humans evolved. It's very close to human sciences. You get to study some psychology, some genetics with this, and it's not something people tend to think of. Or even earth sciences, which cross over with biology and other sciences, and of course don't focus very much on human beings. And then an equivalent for a humanities subject. Let's say you like history. Let's reinterpret that to say you enjoy studying the past. You like looking at events in the past and figuring out how and why they happened and spotting kind of patterns. So it could be that you want to study history alongside something else. You could study it alongside politics or economics or a number of joint courses. It could be that you're interested mainly in ancient history and the classical world. You want an element of Latin, for example. You want to learn a language. You want to look at literature alongside of this. Classical archaeology and ancient history is the CAR course at Oxford. Could be pure archaeology, where again you can focus on the classical world, and you focus much more on history through material culture. So picking apart how empires collapsed or developed through looking at the spread of different kinds of material culture and combining that with different pieces of historical analysis and social sciences. Languages courses, Asian and Middle Eastern studies, Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic, all of these can have a significant element of history if you want them to. There's theology. You may be doing RS and philosophy A level. You might quite like that, but you may not realize that theology at undergraduate level includes lots of history, includes lots of similarities with English literature, and there's also a languages element to studying theology. Specific history, so if you're really keen on a particular area of history, you can zoom into that. And also broader social sciences which overlap with history. I did human, social, and political sciences. I did a paper which was from the history course about the history of political thought. So it's absolutely possible to study the past, but it may not need to just be a pure history course that you're pursuing. It might be something slightly different. Some very broad differences between Oxford and Cambridge. These are generalities, so I'll go through them quite quickly. At Cambridge, there is a higher average interview rate than Oxford. They like to interview a higher proportion of candidates. Oxford like to shortlist down to about 2.5 to 3 candidates per place. In practice, that means that some courses at Oxford that are really oversubscribed might have a shortlisting rate of just 20–25%. With Cambridge, the colleges are slightly more independent from each other, which means there's a bit of variation in admissions. Practically speaking, this means that if you apply for a subject like mathematics, then your experience applying to somewhere like Trinity or Churchill might include an additional test, whereas for other colleges, you won't need to do this. Whereas for Oxford, there's more uniformity. Cambridge gives slightly higher A-level offers on average, whereas Oxford tends to stick to their standard A-level offers, which now are usually A star AA or 2 A stars and an A. Overall, although GCSEs are important for both, there is slightly less emphasis on GCSEs for Cambridge than there is for Oxford, really because the interview rate for Cambridge is higher. So automatically you have a higher chance of being seen for the interview, which means that that is an additional factor, whereas your lower GCSEs for Oxford might rule you out before that stage. Cambridge has fewer degree courses than Oxford, but the actual student population isn't very different between them. So that means that the Cambridge courses need to be a little bit broader, a little bit more flexible than the Oxford courses. I did a bit of psychology in my undergraduate degree. I did a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of history, and some of the courses like natural sciences, like HSPS, like PBS, psychological behavioral sciences, are quite broad. So yeah, just to demonstrate the breadth of courses at Cambridge versus Oxford, the main example to use here is the sciences. At Oxford, you study single sciences, so you go for biochemistry or chemistry. Cambridge, you go for the natural sciences course, which is really, really broad. Supercurriculars might be a word that's come up at school already. It basically means activities that you do that are academic, that are beyond your school syllabus, and that relate to the subject that you're applying for at university. And universities are really keen to see these in your applications. My advice on approaching this is to get a broad understanding of the subject you're applying for. Of course, you need to do that if it's a brand new subject. Read introductory materials. I'd also say to do that if you think the subject is familiar to you, because there'll be significant aspects of that subject that are taught at university that you haven't encountered yet at A level. Then, to keep things efficient, I develop a deeper engagement with 3 to 5 topics in that broader discipline or that combination of disciplines if you're applying for a joint course and dig deeper into them. You don't simply have time to dig deeper into all of your possible interests because you are limited on how much time you have before your application, but you're also limited on the space you have to express your interests. In my experience, about 3 to 5 different topics provides the right balance of depth and breadth in an application. Think if you're looking at what supercurriculars are useful about what an undergraduate might do. So if they're looking to, if you've been given an essay, you're in your first year at uni, what might you do in order to find out more about that subject? So things that are produced by universities, that are delivered by academics, are really the gold standard of things that you should be aiming for. What do I mean by digging deeper? So it could be that you're applying for literature, you've read Chaucer's The Merchant's Tale, maybe your teacher recommended it to you. Is that enough? Well, it's good, but it's not really enough to show that you're really interested in that subject. What would someone, maybe an undergraduate student, do if they wanted to learn more about this? Maybe they'd read other works by Chaucer. Maybe they'd read works by other authors from a similar period. Maybe they'd read some secondary criticism from academics about those authors. So don't stop at one layer. Go 2, 3, 4 layers deep. This doesn't mean you need to read whole books, by the way. You can pick and choose chapters. You can pick and choose little articles and snippets. Um, what are good things to look at? It doesn't need to be limited to academic heavy reading. Absolutely, academic magazines are great. There's lots that are published online. You can look at events and lectures. The LSE is an example. Oxford has lots of lectures. Lots of universities have open, free lectures you can listen to. There really is no excuse not to look at some of these things. There are competitions and prizes. They are pretty common for STEM applicants, so things like maths Olympiads and physics Olympiads, but also there's essay competitions. Not obligatory that you do these, but they can be good exercises in giving yourself a kind of structured way to find out about something supercurricular. Academic articles I've touched on, university short courses, places like FutureLearn, Coursera, EDX. These are great ways that are free and that give you an insight into what it is to study the subject at university. Don't just do these things. Please keep a log of them and write your own thoughts about them. When you come to discuss them at an interview, for example, it's not enough just to say that you've done them. They'll be interested in what you thought about it. Did you agree with it? What next did you do about it? Do you still agree with what you wrote in your personal statement? So keep an academic diary and keep it alive. So if you change your mind, that's fine. Go back to it. Um, really try and live like an undergraduate student with regards to this subject. So I won't go through all of these, but I'll make sure that this recording gets sent to you in case you want to come back to this. This is an example of some supercurriculars a successful maths applicant had. So they had some reading in there, they did an online course, they did a couple of maths challenges and competitions, mentored younger students for Maths Club, learn how to use MATLAB, which is a way to write about mathematics for their extended project, and so on. So these are the sorts of things that that certainly Oxford and Cambridge value in your application. Here's an example for the humanities and arts. Um, read French literature, read some German literature, watched films, won a Young Artist of the Year competition, which might seem irrelevant, but they made it relevant because they did a piece about German history, wrote an essay for the school magazine, and so on and so forth. So build a picture of yourself as someone who has a self-propelled interest in the subject matter. Okay, very briefly, Oxbridge colleges. What are they? When you apply to Oxbridge, you also need to apply to a college. The reason I'm not going to spend much time talking about this is because there's lots of good resources about this on each of the websites, and because your choice of college doesn't have a huge statistical impact on your chances of getting in. Arguably, there is a small statistical impact, but it's very hard to predict and it's very hard to control. So what are they? You're a member of the college and you're also a member of the university. There's about 30 colleges at both Oxford and Cambridge. Each college takes about 100 to 150 students, undergraduate students in each year, studying a whole range of different undergraduate courses. They're dotted around the city, and it's where you live and for the most part study and socialize. So there's a library in each college. You might be writing your essays for the most part in the college. So when you're looking at colleges, consider what the accommodation is like. Can you live on site? What does it look like? Do you have en suites? Do you have to share a two-bedroom dormitory, as I did in Queen's College at Cambridge? Where is it? Do you have a real strong interest in being in a particular location? What are the facilities like? If you play music, for example, do they have music rooms? And there really is no substitute for visiting your short list of colleges. So you cannot visit all of the colleges in one day. There's just no way you can do that. There probably is, but you'd spend about 10 minutes and you'd die of exhaustion at the end. So 5 or 6 colleges really is the maximum you want to aim for a day trip. So a few pieces of advice on the application process. Personal statements, important for every university, to different extents. Generally speaking, the more competitive the course you apply for, the more important your personal statement is likely to be. What is a personal statement? So it goes into UCAS, it's 4,000 characters long, including spaces. And now you write these in 3 parts. You used to write them just as one whole chunk of text, but it's still treated as one chunk of text because they read it all in one chunk. And really, the aim is exactly the same as it's always been. From the perspective of these universities, the very academically selective and research-focused universities like Oxford and Cambridge, they want to see what you've been doing to explore your subject beyond your syllabus and what you think about that exploration. So my advice is to make your personal statement as super curricular focused as you can. If you've got extracurriculars to talk about, then absolutely give them 1 or 2 sentences, but try to focus most of your space on what you've been doing beyond your school syllabus. They know what you're doing for your school syllabus. They don't need to be told the skills that you're learning in mathematics A level. They're also being told that how good you are at those subjects by your school teachers. They've got your predictions, they've got your GCSEs, they might have your admissions test score. So that stuff is repetitive and it's not giving them anything that will distinguish you from other applicants. So focus on your own interests and how you've pursued them. And don't just list those things. Remember to input your own academic personal thoughts. Why did it nuance your opinion? Did you agree with the argument? Did you think something was missing? Did it apply to an example from your own reading? And so on and so forth. What next? Add some of your own personal thoughts. Don't just list what you've done. And remember to speak to all of your choices. It's one personal statement that goes to your 5 UCAS choices, so it needs to appeal to all of them. Admissions tests. Most of you will need to sit an admissions test. It's used for most courses and some other universities too. They are highly impactful for the courses that use them, particularly if there is a really tough shortlisting statistic. So, for example, for Oxford, if you're applying for PPE or economics and management or mathematics and statistics, your admissions test is going to be very important in determining whether you get through to the interview or not. And the margins are pretty tight. Most of the admissions tests, when you look at the results, are marked on a bell curve, which means that the majority of people achieve fairly similarly. It could only be the difference between 2 or 3 points in your admissions test that brings you through to the interview stage. So begin preparation early. These tests are not A-level tests. They may use some A-level knowledge, maybe some GCSE knowledge, but they ask you to apply that knowledge to unfamiliar types of questions, and quite often they're pretty much purely skills based. But there's also techniques you can learn to master them. We teach admissions tests, we provide tuition for them, we have our own online learning software where we've uploaded our mock tests and so on. So you can absolutely contact us for some support. There's also lots of free resources out there. And just note big changes this year. So if you're expecting to sit the PAT test, if you're applying to Oxford and your teachers are telling you that you have to sit the MAT or the PAT, you don't. You have to sit a different test this year. It'll be either the TMUA or the ESAT or the TARA or UCAT or LNAT, depending on what you're applying for. Submitted work is a minority issue, so only a handful of subjects will ask for essays, but they are important for the subjects that use them. Usually you're asked to submit 1 to 3 essays, so pieces of work, ideally from your schoolwork. If you don't have something you think is appropriate, just contact the college you've applied to. They're likely to say, "Don't worry, you can submit something else," or "Let's set you a title and some guidelines and write something fresh for us." My main advice for submitted work is that quite often I see candidates looking to submit something which seems impressive. Maybe it's full of references and it's got a 2-page kind of reference list that they've used, but I have no idea what they're arguing or how they're answering the question. It's much better to submit something which is an evidence-based argument, which has a clear structure, and which really directly grapples with the exact question that you've been set. Because those are the same things that they're looking for from undergraduate essays. So really seek in essays that you may need to write that you may think you might submit to create a clear argument, which means planning your essay thoroughly before you start writing it. Then some subjects require specific formats. If you're applying for architecture, you need to submit a portfolio of your work. You might have art A level, your art teacher can help you. If you're applying for music, you might need to submit a Bach chorale or a piece of technical work. So for quite niche subjects, artsy subjects, you might need to submit something a little bit more specific. And these things can be used at interview. So bear in mind that it's something that can come up. If it's a topic you would hate to talk about, then don't submit that essay because it can very well, like it did for me, come up in your interview. Speaking of which, the final piece of the puzzle is the interview process. This happens in December. So for the current candidates who are hearing back, at the moment, for example, from Cambridge, the results got released yesterday, from Oxford a couple weeks ago. They got interviewed in December last month. So for you, if you're in year 12, you'll be interviewed in about 11 months' time, hopefully. Not everyone gets through to the interview. It's about 75% on average for Cambridge, a little bit lower for Oxford. So if you get through to the interview, then you've done really well already. They're 20 to 45 minutes long, usually have 2 academics speaking to you, and the vast majority are online. For Oxford, last year they were all online. For Cambridge, it was about 80% that were online. Some colleges gave applicants the choice, and some asked for particular subjects to come in person. It's not based on knowledge. So some knowledge of your subject will be assumed. If you've talked about something in your personal statement, they'll assume you know a bit about it, not that you're an expert on it. If you've done that relevant A level, they'll assume that you are relatively familiar with the content from that A level, if it's relevant. But the emphasis is very much on your ability to work with new material. So depending on the subject you're applying for, the chances are they're going to show you something you've not seen before. They might start with something you're relatively familiar with, maybe a function you've seen in maths A level, and then they will quickly develop that into something that you're not familiar with, but you have to apply what you know to the new problem. Similarly, with arts and humanities, it could be a piece of text you're given, could be an image, could be a video. It could be a lot of different things, a piece of data, something that you might look at as an undergraduate for that subject. And they're looking to see not can you immediately understand where this is from, who wrote this, and what the implications are, but what can you evince from this source on its own terms? What can you take from it? Are you going to jump into this degree and take these new materials and make something of them? Are you confident enough in your own intellectual ability to do that? And if the interview is the first time that you do that, then it can really take you by surprise. So my main advice for that is to practice with unseen material, challenging new pieces of information relevant to your subject. Um, Practice trying to comprehend them and understand them on their own terms and think for yourself about them. Please don't worry about the interviews. Most people find them much more enjoyable than they expect, and try to consider them as an opportunity to test out what it's going to be like to be a student at this university. So a really quick, just to emphasize that it's not about knowledge. Hertford College, Oxford here have said, we're not looking for people who can memorize lots of facts. Instead, we want to see that you can think critically by finding connections, reflecting on, and even challenging what you've read and watched. This taxonomy is really just a pyramid of different academic skills. And what will make you succeed on an undergraduate academic course is not memorizing lots of material, although you might have to do that. It's really getting to those top grades, what your own critical evaluation is like. Are you able to synthesize different ideas? Can you analyze things evaluatively? So your kind of critical and creative skills are really important to try and develop. And just to show you I'm not lying here, here is an interview assessment form from the physics department at Oxford. There are 5 factors that they're marking on in this particular form. This was used a couple of years ago. One is motivation, the other is communication. 40% of their overall criteria are therefore nothing to do with physics. Knowledge is not mentioned anywhere on this interview assessment form. So they're looking at ability, intuition, your suitability for the teaching style, and how much you love the subject. An equivalent for English, just to show the other side of the spectrum. Application, so enthusiasm, and communication, very similarly to the physics interview assessment. This has nothing to do with how much Shakespeare or Chaucer you know. Knowledge, again, is not a factor. Reasoning is the key factor here. What do you like as a thinker? So these factors really indicate your likelihood of undergraduate success. Remember to keep this in perspective, there's always an element of luck or indeterminacy about the application process. They don't always get this right, and there are many more excellent applicants than they have spaces available. So people who would have otherwise done really well at Oxford and Cambridge sometimes don't get in. Sometimes they get in the second time and end up getting first-class degrees. Most decisions are made on fine margins. There's an element of subjectivity, of course there is. And getting an offer or not is not a final statement of your potential for success at university or otherwise, or intelligence. You're already an academic high flyer. If you're applying to these universities, you're already in a really good position. So, in summary, thank you very much for sticking with me. Start as early as possible, make informed decisions, and get help and advice. Plan your time to maximize your performance. So set some time aside, especially as you get closer to the admissions tests and your personal statement writing, to do as best as you can. And don't let fear decide for you. If you like the sound of it, please give it a go and speak to us. If you've got any doubts, any questions, we are a team of Oxford and Cambridge graduates. We provide free support. We do lots of seminars like this. We'll have some seminars on admissions tests coming up in Easter, but we're also very happy to speak with you one-to-one. If you want to give us a call, if you want to email us, we can help to answer your questions. And if you want to book a 20-minute video call with one of our team, you can do so via the QR code link there. Thank you so much.